Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arianna Zrzavy, and on behalf of my master's project team, of which you've already seen two of the other members, I will now be presenting to you our current research, which is on environmental justice tools of the 21st century. First, I would like to give a brief overview about what our project is about. My master's project team is currently partnered with the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, or the MEJC. This coalition is focused mainly on environmental justice problems that are specific to the state of Michigan, and they are partnered with many other regionally specific environmental justice organizations. Our project is also a continuation of a previous master's project done by students at SEAS, who also worked with the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, and this previous master's project group assessed the state of environmental justice in Michigan. And I mention this because both the previous master's project and our project was very much focused on the concept of an environmental justice screening tool in the state of Michigan. Now, for those of you who do not know what an environmental justice screening tool is, I will try to sum it up as quickly as possible. It is essentially a tool or map, typically in an online platform, that combines socioeconomic, demographic data, or health data with environmental data, such as environmental hazards or series of pollutants. And when combining these factors, you can create a visualization of environmental injustices in a region, specifically ranking certain census tracts to see which areas are the most vulnerable and affected. In this figure on my slide, you can see the figure created by last year's master's project team, where they used methodologies that have been used by the state of California to see where are the greatest hotspots of environmental injustice in the state of Michigan. However, our objectives with environmental justice screening tools and researching them are slightly different than last year's master's project group. Firstly, we want to identify all states in the United States that use a state-specific environmental justice screening tool. And then through that, we want to understand how these tools are used in state-level decision-making. We believe that it is not enough to simply say that you have an environmental justice screening tool and can identify certain communities. We wanted to know how these tools are being used to maybe remedy some of these situations. And finally, when our research is concluded, we hope to roadmap best practices of how screening tools can be developed and implemented to benefit communities in the state of Michigan. Our methods are currently to conduct a series of informational interviews with the states that we've identified as having environmental justice screening tools. And these interviews have been conducted with academics, state officials, EJ organizations, and community members from these different states, among other people that we've interviewed. We are currently conducting a qualitative analysis of the interviews that we have conducted thus far using NVivo, which is a qualitative analysis software. And as I mentioned, we are currently analyzing our data, so unfortunately I cannot give you any conclusive or definitive results as of yet, but I am free to talk about some existing patterns that we have seen in our data thus far. Firstly, we see some patterns in how these tools are being developed in these different states. For example, how long does it take to get a tool developed in a certain state agency? Is the tool even created within a state agency as opposed to being created in an institution outside of the state? And does that have any impact in how effective it is? There's also a difference in how people perceive the screening tools should be used. So, for example, do people see these tools as merely a tool to inform and educate people on environmental justice and therefore injustice? Or are they being used to actually further environmental policy and perhaps aid in resource allocation for these different communities? And finally, we see existing patterns in terms of the barriers that come up when deciding to create these screening tools. There are certain groups that we have found to be commonly resistant towards the development and implementation of these screening tools, and we also see many barriers at the state level in terms of lack of funding, lack of staffing, and generally a lack of collective data in order to create something like a screening tool. Now, I understand that that probably wasn't very conclusive, but as I said, we are still currently analyzing our data, and if you are curious as to our final results, I encourage you to come to our capstone presentation, which I believe will be in April. Thank you.